Welcome. Welcome to episode 13 of Reading to Mom. My name is Joe, the publisher at Historia Research near Printers Row in Chicago, Illinois. As a publisher of a fantasy novel, let me say that it is perhaps not the best idea to have the main characters constantly fretting over the loss of life due to their fellowship and escapades in a dangerous world. If we publishers became preoccupied or even gave a second thought to the loss of life among goblins and orcs or whichever civilization has been chosen to receive the brunt of our heroes' exploits, as the author now suggests, then all fantasy would be reduced to the tale of fellowships of peacemakers who narrowly averted the casting of a fireball. With that note, I am introducing the author reading to his mother. Hi, Mom. To this point in the narrative, we've merely hinted at the transformation Sidra undergoes during her appointment at the Acropolis along the Lyman. Chapter 12 delves for the first time into the inner turmoil that Sidra begins to experience, arising from the events at the Orga Lair, the horrific events at the Orga Lair. This development is lost on my publisher, who is dumbfounded, to say the least, when presented by the idea that we should show care for the societies on the receiving end of genocidal fantasies. Sidra has been a member of the Eastern elite of the Provenance for her entire life. She was born in Naxos and then spent many years in Panoptes serving the High Council. She's never truly doubted whether or not the Provenance is the heir or the guiding light of the Arcane Age. And while she's used and understands the phrase Empire for Liberty, her emphasis has always been on the liberty and not on the empire. At the Acropolis, the periphery of the Provenance, Sidra soon learns that an empire builds itself at the expense of the colonized. Following the events at the Orga Lair, Sidra's faith in reason and the Provenance have been shaken. She does not, however, fully recognize why and to what extent, and therefore, after one last indignity from the dynasties, she redirects herself and her purpose at the Acropolis. Chapter 12, Octopus. They soon returned to the Acropolis, uncertain of how events became uncontrollable, or so they told themselves. The one exception was Aj, who never felt it necessary to consider that alternative actions may have been open to the philosophers, and certainly no alternative outcome more favorable to the well-being of his companions and the Provenance. Filled with grandiosity, Aj spoke of the acolytes showered on the Kinezalone who first drove the Orga from the Ferris Mountains.
In private, he told me we had honored the memory of Gorgos the Great.
Sidra recorded. Despite the passing of more than 8 arcane epochs, or more than 1,000 years, since the Provenance's first transgression against the Lyman, the archives rarely reveal any sign that its wayfarers felt regret for the bloody invasions that made westward expansion possible. Even more rarely, the archives yield an official document of the Provenance expressing the thought that its democratic people needed to find more empathy and adopt more inclusive practices for the Tramontane. Sidra's decisions and the tactics of her Soon illustrate little had changed during the Long Age. One noted historian of the Arcane Age concludes, "A culture of war took shape from the endless conflict along the borders of the Provenance and the West Lyman, insidiously insinuating itself into the whole way of life of the Domain. Lyman outposts like the Acropolis proved especially effective as builders of provenantial cultural identity, because the nascent cities harbored citizens with nostalgia for the past and embodied innocence in the motive to spread Republican values, while also concealing the realities of invasion and defeat for the peoples of the Lyman." Footnote 1. From Getman, End of Provenantial Culture, page 5. End footnote. This is to say, Sidra's abominable acts followed a long train of atrocities that took place in the region surrounding the Acropolis, as well as the 4 prior outposts that served as border strongholds at the extreme of the Provenance during an age of urban recovery. Footnote 2. The recovered city of Pélene, of course, became the first outpost on the border of the Provenance and Lyman. In turn, Libua, Alcyonius, and Agrinio served as the tip of the spear for the spread of provenantial democracy and culture in the Domain during the Arcane Age. End footnote. This is to say, Sidra's abominable acts followed a long train of atrocities that took place in the region surrounding the Acropolis, as well as the 4 prior outposts that served as border strongholds at the extreme of the Provenance during an age of urban recovery. Most certainly, her Soon's actions were not the last of the terrible events Telos visited upon the warring factions of the Arcane Age. On her return to the Acropolis, Sidra knew she must inform the dynasties what she learned from her latest folly in the Lyman. At the gates, she immediately asked Oron to grant her an audience with the commander. Somehow, though, the gatekeeper already knew the displacement of the Orga clan from their Orphean estate, and the territorial governor expected to see her right away. The gatekeeper assigned 2 sentries to escort Sidra to the military quarters and see her promptly seated before the governor. The dynasty's judgment came swift and pointed. He first reminded Sidra that he had warned her about stacking a Soon with the classical powers of reason. "Without the passions, without the intuition to break from the formal logic of circumstances, we philosophers are no more than a single drop of rain in a storm of ineluctable forces. Sometimes, when all of the evidence points to only one course of action, we must find our way out of the labyrinth of deduction. Here along the Lyman, you will soon learn, if you have not already, the passions are not the opponent of reason, but its greatest allies. When the line of reasoning leads more deeply into the maze of predestination, devised by Telos, our passions reveal the thread of liberation guiding our free will." Footnote 3. Sidra took the time to write out verbatim the lesson the dynasties wished to convey to her, demonstrating to a certain degree the contrition she experienced in the aftermath. Although she never explicitly committed in writing to her intentions, it must be noted that her Soons included at least 2 masters of the passionate philosophies thereafter. End footnote. As the dynasty surmised, the rebuke was not entirely necessary. Sidra scribbled in her journal during her return from the Orga line an acknowledgment of her obtuseness and its contribution to the course of events in both excursions into the Lyman. She wrote,
Matna, the terrifying Mixlin, exemplified the empathetic philosopher of the passions. Before last night I was blind to the wisdom of his words. Now I lay here rereading my journal for his insightful quips during our adventure to the Koboloi.
Footnote 4.
If only I fully understood what he meant when he demanded that the rogue leave the crowns of the Koboloi.
She added. End footnote. Even the damnable rogue earned a newfound respect in the journal of the cleric. It was easy to despise the thieves, since all creatures experience the pangs of desire in some form or another, or so Sidra wrote upon reflection.
Nothing is baser or more common to all living things than the ends of desire, and yet we invest an inordinate effort in hiding or denying its presence. to acknowledge, to tolerate the furtive passion, the one passion all self-respecting citizens sublate in humorous flirtations, crass materialism, or one of the 15 other social deceptions, just seems too much like an act to condone the depredations of desire. Folks know there comes a time when we must seize the opportune moment if we hope to steal away the objective we seek, rather than surrender ourselves to the iron chain of events and chance. In hindsight, Eosha's impertinences vexed me not because she challenged my leadership, but due to the unending revelations that I submitted to teleology without regard for my own desire.
Footnote 5. Of an unknown origin, one arcane proposition held that there are 17 schema of desire. In popular belief, outside of roguery, unadulterated and undivided desire posed a threat to political and social well-being. The 17 schemas, meaning both forms and mass, of desire made it possible to bridle the power of desire in order to bring stability and predictability to social relations. By the end of the Arcane Age, the proposition flowered into an explanation for all social well-being in the Provenance. Having masked their desires and ended the unilateral seizure of goods and persons as existed under the Godheads, the peoples of the Providence made exchange, not possession, the foundation of their social world. Whether flirting, bartering, commingling, collecting, gifting, and so on, the peoples of the Providence conducted themselves as if they united from the base-born and self-evident equality of desire. End footnote. Whereas Sidra won every contest during her first meeting with the dynasties, on this occasion he held the high ground from start to finish. After rebuking her for the neglect of the passions, as he spoke of the damage she had done to the peaceful relations between the Lyman and the Providence, my peace, as he called it. Even after several generations at the outpost, he estimated that the denizens of the Acropolis remained outnumbered 23 to 1 in the immediate region. Any act to provoke the Orga to reach the conclusion that the Providence threatened their welfare and prosperity in the Orphean Mountains may unite the clans in open conflict with the Acropolis. The governor observed sharply, "We are fortunate to share with some Chamontaine our knack for the classical powers. While our differences may be insurmountable, our common systems of forming small bands of philosophers to parley and to skirmish minimize the cost of life and the accumulation of grievances. If the Orga determine to the contrary that our minor conflicts are but the constant din in a larger clash of civilizations, we then will suffer telos, the ends, of total war. Kairos, the pregnant moment, will give birth to inevitable horrors that will be the downfall of both borderlands. Have no doubt there will be a winner. Pyra is its name." Footnote 6. Pyra, meaning funeral pyre. The single parchment scroll is not directly attached to a report by the dynasties to record his meeting with Sidra. The fragment nonetheless shares a common theme with Sidra's records and provides more detail than her daily log. End footnote. Sidra thought he added a little too much drama to his prophecy, but the old guardian of the Acropolis made his point. On both trips into the Lyman, the cleric shuddered when she considered that her adversaries and their cavernous collectives far outnumbered her soon. Peril she clearly faced, but menace had not threatened her. The conflict between the Provenance and the Lyman was not a hot war. To be clear, fearsome beasts like the griffins and dastardly sorts like ogres terrorized the domain. But all liminal groupings that became large enough to warrant consideration as a culture or civilization, like the Cowboy, Orga, Neles, and many others, conducted themselves honorably. None of the peoples of the Lyman conducted an open war with the Provenance. Consequently, the Lyman cultures rarely set upon provenantial sumes with overtly disproportionate force. Like the Providence, the reader should not overlook the Lyman cultures similarly organize their societies around the learning of arcane wisdoms. Perhaps for this reason, and due to some kind of limitation imposed by the classical powers of the four elements, the Lyman cultures commingled their classical powers in relatively small sumes as well. Footnote 7. The potentials and limitations of the arcane philosophers defy empirical examination, since the wisdoms have been lost to humankind for thousands of years. We can only speculate whether the nature of the classical powers somehow limited the commingling of arcanists in small bands, the sumilume, as discussed earlier. One argument suggests the commingling of the four elements entailed volatile forces, which could not be contained safely when arcanists combined in large numbers. Although the glorious revolution and its vast armies seem to contradict the notion, the emergence of dragons in the conflict indicates the extraordinary power of a few arcanists who may have been able to control the unnatural volatility of the classical powers at that time. As the arcane historians Prince L. Pym and Juan M. Roon note, a fundamental difficulty in the study of arcane wisdoms has been the lack of reliable historical data relating to both authors and their texts, which presents major hurdles to be overcome before thorough and substantive advances in the understanding of the classical powers can be made. See their article, Some Problems with the Historiography of the Arcane Wisdoms, in Secrets of the Classical Powers, edited by the Weathermark Center for Rumination of the Classical Powers, Rena Stark, its executive director, published in Chicago, 863 of the Golden Age, from pages 383 to 431, and the quote coming directly from 419. End footnote. By way of an unwritten yet social compact, the Provenance and the Lyman permitted students from both sides to confront and combat each other openly. The outcome of the skirmishes may be tolls, theft, and even death, but no act committed by a Sum against another Sum served as grounds for a grievance by either community. There were costs, obviously, measured in coin, stolen wares, and lives. The benefits from further augmentation and investigation of the arcane wisdoms outweighed those costs from the perspective of both sides. While the arrangement favored lawlessness and personal avarice, to be sure, it did not condone brutality or fiendishness. In short, the social compact empowered the work of arcane philosophers by all cultures of the domain. As the cleric struggled to defend her actions, the dynasty's last words delivered the harshest blow. The loss of life in Sidra's first two diplomatic junkets into the Lyman rendered her unfit for further duties. Word would soon spread to the various cultures and clans of her execution of the Kalbaloi chieftains and her condemnable actions against the Orga. Until further notice, he informed her, she must consider herself no longer subject to the orders of the dynasties. None of the surrounding communities will look favorably on a Sum of emissaries sent in the name of the Acropolis under your command. Report to the councils if you will, the governor counseled her. But know this. You have been released from all duty at the Acropolis, until which time the councils countermand my decision. With the benefit of our historical distance and various documents from our archives, even today it is difficult to dispute the conclusion reached by the dynasties. He maintained peace along the borders of the Lyman by virtue of his understanding for the plight and the pressure provenantial expansion placed on those who fell outside of its jurisdictions. Although dedicated to law no less than other paladins, the dynasties possessed sympathy for social well-being, both inside and outside of the province. Other paladins or territorial governors may not have acted as summarily or unforgiving with the High Council's representative. Without doubt, the pride and rebuke of the peoples of the West Lyman eventually would have forced a less decisive leader to come to the same judgment. The Eastern-born cleric had no currency as a delegate from the Acropolis or an attaché of the Provenance. Sidra, unquestionably, did not enjoy the perspective of our historical distance. She burst out of the governmental chambers, mortified and angered by her dismissal. On the one hand, she felt ashamed that reason failed her, regretful for the number of lives taken from the domain, and discredited by her inability to locate the missing merchant. On the other hand, bitter toward the dynasties who dismissed her tale of a wanderer who united the cultures of the Lyman, dismayed by the events stacked up against her, and furious that her predicament offered her no opportunity to save face by continuing the investigations. Her passions now overpowered the best of her. Without duty, and yet not without purpose, Sidra stomped with indignation through the arteries of the Acropolis to cool off. After her second circuit around the main streets and walkways near the walls of the stronghold, she bolted for the marketplace near the city center. By then, feeling rage more than shame or grief,
I bought a stock of the milk thistle leaves that barbarians chewed to palliate rage. As the aquiline thorns stung my tongue and the milky residue seeped into my bloodstream, I completed a third spit around the citadel before my intemperance subsided.
in her first cogent idea after leaving the dynasties, she decided to pay the clerical guildmaster a visit. Thrice before she had passed the healer's guild, without much thought of the master. She then recalled the recriminations of the noble who she met at the border crossing a month earlier, and the rumors he shared. The suspicious guildmaster had hired a separate team of mercenaries to learn the whereabouts of the merchant.
How was it that this master in my classical powers chose not to summon or call on me during my time at the Acropolis? I've been dishonored. The guildmaster's negligence and faithlessness are a serious discourtesy and insult.
She confided in her journal. Noticeably absent from her account, Sidra omitted any indication for what she hoped to accomplish from a meeting with the master of the clerical guild. It's not clear whether the guildmaster who worked closely with the dynasties had the aptitude to persuade or the confidence to reverse the governor's orders. More or less, Sidra acted on a hunch or suspicion that the two most powerful arcanists in Acropolitan society colluded to undermine the authority of the councils. The evidence, largely circumstantial, seemed to her worthy of my own investigation. Sidra indicted her superior.
At every turn, the dynasties endangers my life or places me in impossible situations. Is this mere coincidence or by design? I am sent by the High Council to investigate and report on the disturbances at the Acropolis. The dynasties has no authority to inhibit the execution of my appointment.
In the offices of the guild, the two clerics immediately butted heads. Sidra's distrust mounted when she learned the master of the guild was Mixellen, another half-Orga, Suntekanax, who had earned a crucial position in the administration of the Acropolis.
The guildmaster readily passed as an anthropodon. I doubt many at the Acropolis gave it a second thought. I only learned of her deception when I saw a purple sash hanging from a hook along the wall. Although it differed with the sashes worn by the Orga that I had recently encountered, I questioned why she owned such an accoutrement. Suntekanax said the sash signified her commitment to her guild of clerics. She followed the teachings of a preternatural age order that served the citizens of Titios before the Glorious Revolution. I had heard of such guilds in my time in the High Council at Panoptes, but in the East we knew little about their prescriptions. No matter. Here was yet another unexpected character from the linemen who had secured a high office at the Acropolis during the dynasty's tenure.
Footnote 8. Here we must read Sidra's words closely. In the heat of the moment, Sidra rashly assumed that the cleric hid her cultural origins from the citizens of the Acropolis. In fact, there was no deception. As young scholars soon learn, even the emotionless documents and records of history inscribe the biases and the habitual thoughts of their authors. The attentive reader benefits from an author's unintentional recording of the ideologies that shape an era. In Sidra's circumstances, stripped of rightful authority and still culpable to the councils, she clearly succumbed to a madness that frequently afflicted those who crossed into the linemen for the first time. Had these slips, these prejudices reflected her true character, she would not have attained her place in history. End footnote. The opening salvo set the tone of the exchange. The guildmaster readily perceived the hostility underlying Sidra's request to meet with her, as well as Sidra's quest for a target to blame rather than an answer to her quandary. In Suntekanax's account, found among the papers of the dynasties, she surmised the Eastern cleric, racked with grief for her misdeeds, now seeks desperately to find fault in others. Suntekanax added an explanation worthy of quoting in full. The first time we, the first philosophers, we creatures of reason, press the boundaries of our faculties, the experience sows the seeds of madness. For we are accustomed to talk of our nature as anime or ether, or zephyr, or geos. Such suppositions search for some prime mover to explain how all being came to be. It matters not which element is named the first element, for any effort to adduce evidence to substantiate the claim falters. In my scholarship, I find such views wrong-headed. If we are only one thing, we shall never feel pain or discover faulty reason. It is not the elements or the many ingredients of the body that determine wellness, but the manner in which the many parts are intermingled. In this, reason, passions, taste, and will are at play, combining and compounding the elements into perfect proportions. Madness, pain, lethargy, and cowardice result when the elements commingle in deficiency or excess. Sidra's symptoms point to the latter kind of malady, an excessive commingling of material elements. Like many in the clerical order, from Naxos, she is likely trained under a delusion. Reason alone determines the order of things. The ferocity of recent events reveals to her the necessity of passions, taste, and will as powerful vessels to obtain our objectives. We can exploit her madness if we show her the way to the end she seeks. Footnote 9. Whereas earlier, Sutekanax used we in the plural form, her last reference to we was singular and more particular, as if the dynasties and herself shared the common objective of assume. She addressed the diagnosis of Sidra to the governor directly. See Sutekanax's letter on the case of Sidra from the Acropolis around the 11th epoch, 7th period, in the collected records of the dynasties. End footnote. These strange yet powerful words are the only surviving record of the Guildmaster Sutekanax's arcane wisdom. While we do not have the space to digress deeply into an examination of the Western cleric's cosmology, her words express the outline of a popular provenantial concept about life among the Lyman during the Arcane Age. Octopos. Octopos strictly translates as out of place, but also possesses additional connotations such as extraordinary, strange, and absurd. The strict meaning of the word out of place the Guildmaster had in mind. For to be out of place to the arcane mind meant two things. One, who experienced atopos, suffered from the sense of belonging to some other place, an absent place, and the sense of being in no place at all, a nowhere beyond place. The paradox of atopos was that one's place was nowhere, and that nowhere was one's place. In a word, the afflicted confronted nothingness. The modern reader must keep in mind the arcane peoples as a whole, and none more so than the arcane philosophers, were a motivated, purposeful people. To be stripped suddenly of intention, design, and goal debilitated the least powerful commoners and the most powerful arcanists at times. Though several different adages attempt to capture the essence of the affliction of atopos, the best is known simply as no. A verse. Who am I? Nobody. Never you mind me. What am I? Nothing. No more is there to do. Where am I? No place. Nowhere have I to go. Why am I? Poor friend, what an absurd question. End verse. Footnote 10. From Solum Dignici, a collection of arcane wisdom, published in Libua around the 5th epoch, 5th period of the Arcane Age. End footnote. Sidra's lamentations after the conflagration of the Orga, that she had become no more than a cog in a course of events beyond her control, and her reaction to the dynasty's decision to relieve her of all duties, to strip her of her purpose at the Acropolis, exhibited the telltale signs of atopos. Although the Guildmaster recognized the symptoms, her attempts to assuage her colleague failed. Sidra refused to consider a spate of downtime to acclimate herself to the Acropolitans and the commerce between the Lyman and the Provenance. Sidra then suggested she become a member of the Sum the Guild independently hired to search for the missing merchant, to which the Master demurred and indicated no such Sum existed. Lastly, Sutekanax rebuffed Sidra's demand for the Guild to intervene with the local nobles on her behalf, effectively turning away the troubled cleric. My guild takes no responsibility for your proximity to the lineman and the distressful place in which you find yourself. Only the council's edict or your determination will enable you to discover the condition in which you find yourself. Feeling defeated, trapped, and angry once again, Sidra exited the guild and popped several milk thistle leaves into her mouth to masticate. She walked a short distance before another lead occurred to her.
The nobles may be my only allies at this unreasonable outpost.
She wrote in her subsequent report to the High Council. A noble drunkard first mentioned the popular suspicion for the dynasties and the guildmaster of the clerics. After Odge interrupted her artifice, she had given little thought to her conversation with the absent-minded noble who left his coin purse at home. Now, cast out from the confidence of the dynasties and the guildmaster of her arcane wisdom, the nobleman's words seemed to be a warning she failed to heed.
The gentleman foretold of the treachery that the leadership of the Citadel had in store for me. I wonder now if he also did not point me to an ally, the traveling cleric adored by the Acropolitans.
Sidra immediately made a beeline for the border crossing, where she hoped to see the nobleman a second time, to arrange a meeting with the traveling cleric. Disappointed, she discovered the gentleman was not there. She stepped up to the bar, ordered herself a Libuan Dunkel-style beer, and took a seat to wait for the noble's house. After turning for the third time to the door of the tavern as it opened, the barkeep addressed her. "Perhaps I can help." Sidra shrugged her shoulders as if she didn't understand the statement. "I said," the deliberate barkeeper asked again, "perhaps I can help." The barkeep, Zoe, she named herself, already knew Sidra's name from her prior forays into the tavern. Zoe recognized her from the first night she visited the border crossing dressed in a commoner's attire. The casualness with which she made the comment suggested the bartender knew much more than that. Footnote 11. It may be helpful at this point to remind readers of an important point. Sidra's personal journal and her reports to the High Council provide the most meticulous accounts of her intercourse with the Acropolitans. Yet we must not think every line Sidra took the time to record bears significant meaning on the history unfolding in these pages. Sidra collected words on her pages, much like a numismatist collects coins. Some items in the collection are precious, while other items are collected because no portfolio would be complete without them. Careful analysis must be our guide to Sidra's records if we are to see the difference between the two. End footnote. Sidra loosened up and requested the whereabouts of the noble she spoke with a month earlier. Zoe responded immediately, without need of further details like the name or features of the nobleman. He was not expected that evening. After pouring a second stein for the cleric, she coaxed a little more information from Sidra about her purpose. "The nobles are clowns. If you need to find out a secret or the whereabouts of a person, talk to me." Sidra laughed and asked,
I don't suppose you know where the missing merchant is.
After Sidra finished laughing at her own joke, she noticed that Zoe didn't laugh whatsoever. She smirked knowingly but seriously at the displaced cleric. Sidra gathered herself and repeated the question. "Before I tell you what you want to know, allow me to tell you who you need to know," Zoe baited her. "Seek out Taki, the street baker, if you have not figured out who to trust. Then, if you want to find the merchant, see Themis, the traveling cleric." Zoe possessed the composure of a wizard, but none of the debilitating self-doubt often consuming the students of that classical power.
As a gnome, I considered the possibility that the barkeep was in fact a powerful sorcerer. Intrigued, I probed into the barkeep's background, half expecting to discover another hidden gem in this abyss at the extremity of the Provenance.
Footnote 12. Nomi. The arcane cognate for gnome meant one who knows. Elven in origin, the term derived from the wizards of Agrigentum, who marveled at the gnome's intuitive powers to cast spells. Like dwarven fighters and hemi-food druids, gnomes demonstrated an unusual knack for sorcery. End footnote. Zoe threw her head back in laughter, scoffing at the suggestion she was a sorcerer. Her unflappable expression suddenly transformed into a beautiful visage of good humor. Then, just as suddenly, she stiffened again, and, Sidra recalled,
Only half jokingly, she warned me, the last rogue who tried to pick my pocket no longer lives in the Acropolis, lingering over the word lives, as if that were the key to her meaning.
After acquiring the details on how to contact Taki and the traveling cleric, Sidra left the border crossing. She noted to herself,
The certainty in Zoe's voice when she directed me to the traveling cleric is enough to convince me of the merit and shrewdness of following up on the suspicions of the nobleman.
The next morning, Sidra headed to the merchant's district to locate the poor beggar. In short order, she found a slender Anthropoid woman dressed in tatters. She wrote,
Beneath the filth and the rags, the silhouette of the beggar indicated she once was an attractive young woman. The beggar's face was much less gaunt than one typically finds among the street beggars.
Two children, dressed similarly, played nearby. On her approach, the poor woman and the children begged for some coin. Sidra tossed a few copper coins over the head of the kids, so they had to scamper away to collect their booty. When the two moved out of earshot, she propositioned Taki.
Zoe tells me you have information for me.
Spare more coin, hun, the beggar replied. Sidra dropped a few copper into the hand of the destitute woman. The beggar repeated her question, clearly unimpressed with the alms Sidra offered in exchange for information. Sidra hesitated, not certain what amount the beggar desired, then opened her coin purse to remove a golden ingot. All right, then, you want to know something special? The beggar led Sidra over to a small tree, away from the children and the passing commoners. There, Sidra bluntly asked her question.
Who do I trust? I demanded. The beggar looked befuddled for a moment. Hesitatingly, she told me she had no idea. I requested to have my coin returned, but the insipid woman claimed I had given her alms, a gift, and that I could not take back a gift. She was right. I had no options. We introduced ourselves. The beggar, Taki, explained to me that I had misunderstood what Zoe meant by the reference. For a small fee, she promised to follow anyone in the Acropolis for a period of time, to see if the untrustworthy one engaged in any surreptitious acts or clandestine meetings. I studied the wretched vagabond a second time. She had no discernible faculty for roguery. Clearly, she was not able to afford the finest instruments that common thieves use to gain access through locked doors or chests. How was it that a lowly mendicant gained her way into the treasured secrets of the Acropolitans?
Nobody sees us octopus, Taki answered with deadpan clarity. Footnote 13. An octopon was a person with acute symptoms of octopus, or a person out of place. For perspective, our closest modern cognate is the concept of the homeless in urban areas from late Middle Age to the High Golden Age. Homelessness, a common social pathology, like octopus, indicates an absence of place. While the analogy is not exact, homeless is the loss of a particular place, not the loss of place itself. The sense of abandonment, alienation, and invisibility the term calls to mind corresponds to Taki's declaration. In our modern times, a much less philosophical time, we have no maladies that closely approximate the existential despair of octopus during the Arcane Age. See Derek Lumhim, L'Octopus, une étude en sociologie à l'âge arcanique, or Octopus, a study in sociology in the Arcane Age, published in Saint-Martin de Croix, 701 of the Golden Age. End footnote. Sidra groaned. She paid the coin already, so her choice was to accept or reject the services of the beggar. She chose, of course, to hire the spy and gladly learned her gift bought her 3 months of intelligence. Aware that the dynasties largely remained inside the military quarters, the cleric directed the beggar to tell the guildmaster of the clerics.
If the noble is correct, soon Tekanax will need to meet with the mercenaries she hired.
After finalizing her contract with Taki, Sidra proceeded to the traveling cleric's homeopathic practice. When she arrived,
The queue stood at 29 deep. I noticed arcanists, nobles, and commoners queued up as one line, the key to winning the commoners' favor among the circuit riders.
Footnote 14. The clerics who traveled the domain to administer remedies and care to the pioneers and settlers of the Provenance. End footnote. Disgruntled, but determined, she stepped into the line of malcontents. Well over 2 hours passed, only interrupted by the occasional and infuriating passerby who exclaimed, "The wait was well worth it." As she moved forward to become the fourth person in the queue, the traveling cleric espied her among his adoring multitude. He grinned and nodded in recognition at his new convert. When Sidra's turn came, the healing adept advised his assistants to wait outside the tent while he attended this precious son. He asked them to keep the line far enough away so the two clerics may converse in privacy. Leaning over to gently wash his hands in a small basin, he observed to no one in particular. Of all the senses, touch is most mysterious. The touch of water, the most mysterious of all. The cleric kept his back to her until the assistants followed his instructions, and then turned to face Sidra as he dried his hands with the cloth. "I am Themis," the traveling cleric introduced himself.
The far-traveled cleric, a round man bearded with pale skin and fiery red hair, carried himself gently.
As they exchanged pleasantries, Sidra learned he originated from Libya, where he studied the classical power of healing under the late master Onomelika, as he was known in the eastern cities. His Libyan guild never earned a seat on the High Council, but Sidra briefly met the clerical master in Naxos once. Her mentor bumped into him in the streets of the cleric city, and the two seemed to know each other from the past. She couldn't recall meeting Themis at the time, but he insisted he was present when their two mentors greeted each other in Naxos.
He certainly knew the details, and he jested how the Libyan malt liquors defeated his belt in recent years, in reference to his girth.
The conversation grew more serious when Themis disclosed he knew how events transpired during the past week. "My local advocates tell me that the nasties impedes your fulfillment of your duties to the Provenance, and that our local guildmaster at the Acropolis will not intercede to correct the injustice. As my master's masters taught, it is easier to be on one's guards against an enemy than a friend."
I recognized the adage immediately as one I quoted far too often in my time at the Acropolis.
Beginning carefully, Sidra shared her story. On her arrival at the Acropolis, she met nothing but inhospitable and closed-mouthed agents of the Citadel.
The traveling cleric permitted my account to continue, inquiring only when he sensed I hid an aspect of the facts.
Gradually, her crescendo peaked as she let loose a tirade against the two architects of the Acropolitan civil disorder.
The healing art is the first and most august of all the classical powers. Yet here, the ignorance of the one who judges right wrongly, and of the one who practices the art of healing ignobly, cause the arcane wisdom to fall into ill repute. The healing art, and arcane wisdom generally, teaches nothing about its use. The classical powers work naturally, and wisdom's part makes adjustments for their application to the social well-being of all that the elements provide. These two profane philosophers mold civic justice to suit their own hands, contrary to provenantial law. They must soon submit to the rule of the councils.
Footnote 15. The passage, though a bit obscure, reveals how Naxian clerics regarded the operation of the classical powers. To the cleric, the elements operated independently, naturally, and the classical powers of the arcane philosopher merely makes adjustments to target their usefulness. Her final line suggests the two leaders of the Acropolis adjusted the forces of nature to suit their own interests over the public good. To Sidra, the possible betrayal of a cleric to the laws of the Provenance elicited a special disdain, since her class of wisdom and its application for the betterment of social well-being preceded the other wisdoms. End footnote. Themis had heard plenty. He confided to Sidra, My guild has regarded the Acropolitan clerics with suspicion for many crimes. The Libuan order sent him to build popular support for a new clerical order at the Acropolis. Not long after I staked my tent, the guildmaster began to interfere in my affairs, he stated. It was Suntekanax who gave me the title of traveling cleric to undermine the local population's interest in my wisdom. No two ways about it, she meant the title to remind the commoners I only recently came to the Acropolis, and to convince them an interloping cleric soon moves on. Sidra entered the rest of her exchange in these words.
He went on to explain to me, indeed, the guildmasters hired a team of mercenaries to investigate, gesturing to indicate his disbelief, the disappearance of the merchant.
Themis added, truth be told, the cleric hired the mercenaries before the merchant's disappearance.
My new compatriot thought it sound to suspect Sutekanax played a role in the merchant's abduction. When the townspeople agreed to sell the public house to the affluent merchant, the guildmaster had led the opposition.
He continued, nonetheless, Suntekanax will not act alone. She is not sufficiently powerful and will require the support of the Hex or other mercenaries if she has designs on the Acropolis. It is more likely that she works in cooperation with the dynasties or some other significant official who plans to usurp the legal order.
Themis told me that he had insufficient knowledge of the dynasty's loyalties. Fortified behind the walls of the military sector, and strangely aloof from the common quintiles of the Acropolis, he could be absent from view for weeks without notice. He had guessed that the governor remained an overzealous servant of the councils due to the opposition of the merchants and the nobles. In light of my treatment, my newfound confidant now surmised.
His conduct towards you suggests to me that not even the will of the council guides his actions. Most human things come in pairs, not as a determinate set of opposites, but like the haphazard combination of vainglory and ambition. The dynasties and the guildmaster may have formed their own propitious allegiance. The two sat quietly for a second to consider the implications of their suspicions. Suddenly it became clear to Sidra.
The dynasties has been too long the final arbiter of law at this outpost on the Lyman. He submits neither to the will of the people nor the will of the councils. He now orchestrates seditious events with the aid of the guildmaster to create conditions to permit him to permanently seize power in these borderlands as a preternatural despot.
Themis concurred, but hedged with the subtlety apropos of the high-minded clerics. We must have evidence to substantiate the accusation. About matters invisible, the fates possess clarity. But so far as the people who will judge our indictment of the dynasties, we must perish if we cannot join the beginning to the end. The two agreed that the location of the merchant represented the most promising avenue of investigation, but the search now focused on finding and interrogating the guildmaster soon. Themis's apprentices followed them south after the mercenaries last visited openly with the guildmaster 2 months ago. Since then, a druid in winged form frequently perched on the sill of the high cleric's chambers. Each time, Themis noted, the druid flew north as if to clumsily expose the direction of its return. The two also decided Themis must stay behind to maintain a watchful eye on the subjects. The agents of the Provenance differ from the other inhabitants of the Acropolis, he reminded her, because the former alone understand, whereas the latter perceive but do not understand. In any case, the traveling cleric had made his reputation servicing the needs of the commoners, while establishing a rapport with very few of the adventuring arcanists at the Citadel. Themis had to stay in the comfort of the Acropolis so as not to raise suspicions among its leaders. Sidra remarked in her journal that evening.
Time contains many opportune moments, but the opportune moment contains little time. The duty to assemble a new Sum to head south in search of the mercenaries as soon as possible falls to me.
Footnote 16. Sidra's original passage begins with a clever wordplay for the two arcane concepts of time. Kairos, and Chronos that defies modern translation. End footnote. And this concludes Chapter 12 of Arcane Cage.